Are you a React Native developer and you're looking to target Windows?
Maybe you've already targeted Windows, but you're just dissatisfied in the current implementation.
Well, we've got some great news. Microsoft is reworking the React Native for Windows SDK so that it targets the Facebook core C++ implementation. This episode is just for you.
Hey, and welcome to the next episode of Microsoft Dev Radio. I'm Jerry. This is Daren.
Hello.
And we're here with Harini. She's a program manager on the Windows development team. Hi, Harini. Thanks for being back on the show.
Pleasure.
Now, Harini, first introduce who you are and the team you work on and what's special about it.
Sure. So I'm Harini. I've been a PM with the Windows developer and ecosystem platform team for about 8 years now. We work on the native Windows platform, all the XAML stuff, that's the cool UWP stuff, and whatever you use to make native apps for Windows 10, the comp stack, the input stack, all of that stuff is coming from our team, and I'm one of the PMs in that team. For the context of this particular call, one of the stuff that we've been working on in the past year, several months, I would say, is the supporting for React Native on Windows, and having a little bit of a good implementation that targets Windows for people who are used to React and web-based programming, and like giving them a bridge so that they can actually use that kind of programming model and target Windows from a very native standpoint. So that's one of the things that we've started working on, and that's my primary job these days.
Got it. So right now, everything React is right there in your pocket. Yeah. I understand. Now, Daren, you've used React before.
I've played around with it, yes.
What's so special about React?
Well, I mean, there's two parts to React. You've got React, the web platform, which effectively has a nice sort of responsive model. And it's a lot smaller than Angular because it's not really a framework per se. It's just a UI toolkit, if you like.
Yeah.
But then you have React Native. And React Native really has kind of an abstract UI definition that projects into the native rendering of each of the platforms it runs on.
Got it.
And there's actually been a React Native for Windows for quite a while, but I'm kind of interested in learning a little bit more about this new version that Harini's working on.
Harini, so there's a new version of React?
Yeah, React Native for Windows. So like what Daren was talking about, there's a lot of advantages that the React Native and React-based programming model brings with it. And we've been, like a lot of developers that we engage with, even across our own first-party teams and, like inside Microsoft, have been talking to us about like, hey, here are a couple of advantages. Like, for example, there's a very great div inner loop where you can just hit Control-S on your JavaScript and your UI reloads, and it's all very, smooth and flowing. And, it's very, very fast iterative development that people are able to have. That's one of the reasons. And then there's also the other reasons around like, JavaScript is JavaScript, so you can actually deliver JavaScript files on the fly to your app. And, you don't have to go through an app update and, like wait for the end user to update your app to get new stuff on your UI. So this is kind of very powerful for apps that are trying to do like service delivered experiences and those kind of things. So when we were looking across and we saw that a lot of people are using React Native, even within Microsoft and, first parties, we were like, okay, so maybe we can just, invest a little bit here and make the experience on Windows, the developer experience on Windows a little bit better, targeting Windows a little bit better. So that's kind of how we got involved. And like what Daren was saying, the first version of a React Native for Windows implementation was put out in 2016, I want to say. And it was done by our evangelism team. It was a little bit of a community-driven effort. And it was a fully C# implementation that took a fork off of Facebook's React Native. And it was like it was done as a implementation that was very similar to the Android implementation that Facebook put out at that time. What happened since then is that there's been a lot of changes. There's been a lot of, that space has evolved in that time. And Facebook's React Native is now kind of moving towards a C++ core bridge. What we are now putting out as the second version of React Native for Windows is taking advantage of that C++ core and re-implementing React Native for Windows in C++ and doing a little more of a performance-driven implementation, which we are funding from the platform team. So instead of it being just a community-driven effort, this is now actually we are getting serious about this.
You're all in.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is it's a much improved version. It's a C++ version, so it's obviously the performance is a little bit better. And it is we are actually working very closely with Facebook and the React Native community to make this a Windows is going to be like not a separate thing, but as integrated into the React Native community as possible.
Sure. Now, is it still community contributed, or is this now inside Microsoft?
It is inside Microsoft, but I want to clarify that actually. It is an open source project. It's out on GitHub. It's the same repo that's already existed with the old previous version. We didn't want to create a separate one and all that stuff. We are trying to do this as a V2 of the earlier existing one so that people can continue using the one that's already there. And once the C++ one gets a little more mature in terms of feature complete and stuff like that, we can just have a migration path from the C# earlier implementation to this vNext implementation that we are putting out there. So yeah, it's all out there. It's an open source project, but a lot of the development is funded by Microsoft. So there is, our native Windows platform team has devs contributing code to it. Like our PM team is involved in the shaping of the APIs and everything. We are collaborating across the Microsoft first-party app teams that are all working on it. Like Office is working with us to make this implementation really great. Things like that. But it is open source, and we are accepting contributions. And it's a good OSS project. We are embracing open source everywhere within Microsoft these days.
Well, sometimes just having it on GitHub is enough just for visibility and for issues and things like that, so people can see what's going on and trust it. They don't need to necessarily contribute back sometimes, just so they can have that visibility into it. So tell me just a little bit about me as a React developer. I'm accustomed already to using the C# implementation. I'm ready to start migrating over. What are some of the things I need to know?
We are in the early stages. The C++ implementation has to get to a mature degree before you can do the migration. So the migration path itself hasn't been determined. It's just a promise right now that, hey, you can start, and then we will help you migrate once the C++ implementation has all the features that the C# implementation was providing for you. Working with React is pretty straightforward. There is like a couple of npm modules that you need to install, and there is there's 2 or 3 command line tools. The stuff that we are working with is making sure that if you're using the C# version today, you would be installing React Native Windows using a command line tool. You'll be saying React Native Windows and npm install React Native Windows. And the way we are doing the vNext version is to kind of add a tag in there. So by default, if you're using that, you'll be getting the C# implementation. But for vNext, you'll be doing npm install React Native Windows -- vNext, and you should be getting the vNext version.
So let's look at a different scenario. Say I already have a React Native application that's targeting iOS and Android, and heretofore I haven't considered using Windows as a target, but I'm using the latest and greatest React Native for those platforms. What sort of activities would I need to do to move to, once the new version of React Native for Windows is production ready, what sort of activities would I need to do then to include that as another delivery target, as it were?
Very simple, just one more line, command line command. If you're already using React Native, you're using command line arguments like you're saying React Native init, and my project. And when you do that, you're getting an iOS and Android target, and you have all the React Native Node modules installed in your computer and stuff like that. So assume that you're already done that and you have an iOS and Android version running. All you have to do at that point is install one more module for React Native Windows and say, hey, React Native Windows install, npm install React Native Windows, and you can target the vNext version. At that point, in the same folder, folder structure, and wherever you're creating, wherever you have your project running, a new folder will be added for Windows with all the node modules required for running Windows, and you can continue development there.
Great. So because we're leveraging that standardized React Native core, then it's just compatible.
Yep. That's the goal.
It reminds me a little bit of Xamarin Forms, the way that it works.
It totally is like Xamarin Forms. Xamarin Forms, it's kind of doing the same thing. Like it's the the way Xamarin Forms works for our C# and .NET developers who are familiar with all that stuff. There are bindings to native code, right? Like so, you're writing some abstraction. Like if you're doing a Xamarin Forms button, it kind of translates into the native button in those native platforms when it's run. React Native works exactly the same way. The only difference being that the programming model is a web-based programming model here versus a .NET programming model here. And that's kind of why we got involved. We're like, hey, there is a very great solution we already have in Xamarin for .NET developers. What about web developers? They're also trying to do this. Can we make them something that'll work for Windows? So that's kind of
That's right. And I remember in the early days of Xamarin Forms, one of the issues was they would create a list view for you, but it wasn't actually a list view behind the scenes. They were creating something that looked just and behaved just like a list view. And so they didn't have some of the advantages that list view had. Now you're on the XAML team, or your team, of course, owns all those core controls. So now that React Native is going to be implemented, we know that they'll be implemented in a way that is ideal.
Yes, that's definitely one of the criteria that we are kind of applying here. That said, React Native also has similar models to Xamarin Forms where you can create, components that are not necessarily using the native concepts, but like an abstraction concept entirely built in the JavaScript layer. There are ways you can do that. And in fact, the flat list and section list components that React Native provides for you out of the box are JavaScript components, and they don't actually use the native components. Turns out that list is complicated across platforms, and it's very difficult to make it an abstraction. So we see the same things that Xamarin Forms did over here as well, but it's like, because we are kind of involved in this from the what do I say, we're really, the XAML team is the one that's also doing the implementation for Windows. So we are trying to make sure that, hey, how native can we actually make this? Can we really remove all the layers that, it doesn't have to exist? And we are definitely approaching it from that side as well as trying to make sure that both stories are available to the React Native developers and the community.
Now, it was interesting to me, like when I would see different products of Microsoft start to use other products, they would change those products. So like I remember when SharePoint started, they would use SQL Server, and they introduced this idea of saving files, but not inside the database. So we had this new file type that we'd have, and I was like, oh, that's because this created it because we needed it there. Are we going to see some changes to some of our native controls because of what React is requiring us to do?
We may. We already kind of started doing that when we started working with Xamarin Forms very closely as well. Like we started introducing things like, rounded buttons and things like that would make the impedance mismatch between the layers a little bit easier. It's more of a, we are trying to be good citizens in this ecosystem. The thing that we care about is developer experience. We are a platform team. We really want developers to have the best experience. And if the most important things, the higher order bit is to also target iOS and Android. We want to make sure that, the impedance mismatches across platforms is as minimized as possible, while we retain all the good things that are, Windows only. So, we are trying to strike that balance there, and it's a little tricky, but, we own both, so we can do a lot of things.
Good point.
So you mentioned obviously leveraging the native rendering capabilities. Is that going to be leveraging WinUI as WinUI matures, or is it going to be more tied to the platform?
No, you're absolutely right. We are, it will be using more and more of WinUI as WinUI matures. And if you had seen some of the build talks from this year, Joe Stegman's and talked about how we are trying to lift and shift the platform itself and, ship it outside of the OS, which is going to be the WinUI, it's going to be the WinUI kind of thing. And as we are building that lift and shift of the platform, React Native for Windows will target that lifted platform. So, it's going to be.
So you will have much greater reach. You won't be on Windows latest.
Exactly.
Perfect.
React Native for Windows is already an abstraction, so it already targets. Right now, if you build with React Native for Windows, you can target from RS2+. So it's already there. But, as the platform itself gets lifted, it becomes much more easier. We don't have to do that in our layer. The platform does that. So it's very easy. And wherever the platform goes, React Native for Windows will go.
So one of the things we know we love about React is I can use all the skills that I've built as a web developer to be able to build this out. I know I have a cross-platform story that's pretty solid and pretty well proven. What's the downside? Like, why would a developer not just come to the conclusion of, why would I build a native app natively?
I mean, there's always going to be those two sets of camps, right? Like, really, really strong, like if you're building a super high productive enterprise heavy experience on desktop and on Windows, sure. I mean, the core native stack is always going to be the best stack to develop against. This is more of a, like what Xamarin offers and like what any other abstraction across platforms offers. It's more of a little bit of an easy tool for you to do some of those sharing capabilities and stuff like that if you're interested in that. And because it has some of the advantages that you get out of like service delivered experiences and things, you can use that for those scenarios. But I think for apps that don't necessarily need to go cross-platform, they don't need to use this. They can just completely use the native stack as they want. And for scenarios like the React Native for Windows, the way we have kind of constructed the model here is that you can host small, islands of content, just like you would host inside Win32 apps. You could host React Native content as small pieces within your big native app. So that's, that's kind of how it could work.
So you can kind of using a XAML islands approach to hosting that projection and then being able to host it in WPF.
So React Island.
Absolutely. So exactly. I think Paul's favorite term for this is React Inception. I don't know. There's you can use React Native for Windows inside a UWP app. You can make your entire app that. Or you can put small pieces of content, just like you would do web views today, right? Like if you're trying to bring in a little portion of your web content in. Today you use web views. React Native is a much better alternative because you can actually get native capabilities inside that web content. So it looks very similar to the rest of the app. There is no zebra. There is, it looks and feels exactly like a native app for the end user. And then if you use React Native for Windows inside a XAML island, you can take it all the way to Win32. So now you have a WPF app with a XAML island, which hosts UWP. And because UWP can take React Native, you get React Native there. So you get the whole package.
That's why it's Inception.
Exactly.
Yes. And you can do the reverse as well. So React Native has this great model, which is very similar to the Xamarin Forms model, where you can, drop down to the native extensions. Like, if there are some components that are missing in the React Native set of APIs that are just offered for you, you can drop down and write your own component, and that extends the, whatever WinRT API you need, and just make your own thing. So, all those stuff is available to you. So, like, interop works very well both ways, and it's really good for if you just want the goodness of the web development model, but you want to take advantage of all the native stack, this is a good option for you.
So you can detect if those additional components are available, because obviously they wouldn't be available on iOS, and just have an alternate experience in that situation.
Yep. Exactly.
Now, what's the tooling experience? Are we doing anything to improve that for the developer on the Windows side?
Yes, absolutely. So most of the React Native tooling, these the React Native ecosystem itself, the tooling is all NPM and command lines and stuff like that. VS Code has a React Native extension. Today, you can install it. Yep. The one that it targets today is the iOS and Android versions. We are actually working very closely with VS Code right now, and hopefully, I want to say in less than a month, we should have that supporting Windows as well. So that'll be good. I hope I can keep that promise.
So now we're talking about actually rendering and working on what is effectively a UWP application inside VS Code.
Exactly.
Whoa, that's the first.
That's the first.
Yes, and inside VS Code, in the sense that all your development you're doing, if you're a React Native developer, you're doing it in JavaScript. And VS Code really offers some of the best extension capabilities for doing all those JavaScript type development. So what we are doing right now is, hey, you run your app on UWP, use VS for that, like do whatever you want. But once the app is running, the dev inner loop and all that stuff you can take advantage of from VS Code. Yeah, the hot reload, all that stuff you can take advantage from VS Code. And VS Code actually has a couple of command lines that you can kind of do, like you can, write your JavaScript and then say, hey, debug, run Windows. It'll actually launch the UWP app for you. So that's pretty cool.
That's incredible, isn't it?
That's really cool. That really is the first. We were wanting VS Code to do UWP. So that's the developer story. Talk to me a little bit about.
Actually, before we move on, so there's also a wider community developer experience and tooling that services like expo.io offer. These are like services that are, like really the React Native community tooling. As part of our conversations with Facebook and their extended community, we are talking to Expo, and like we are trying to see if Windows can be a good part of Expo's wider suite of tools offered for React Native for Windows as well. So let's see how all these things kind of shape up together, but everything is kind of in the pipeline.
Wouldn't it be really neat if the standard React creation didn't just create the iOS and Android, but also created Windows at the same time?
We are working on making that happen.
Yeah, awesome.
Or if it's only created Windows.
I mean, in all honesty, the way that Facebook talks about React Native is also not as a Vora. It's not supposed to be a write once, run everywhere thing. It's supposed to be like hey, you learn once and then you write wherever you want to, and like target whatever you want to. It's more of the programming model offers a lot of good things, and you're taking advantage of that. But like in reality, it may not always be the exact same thing in every platform. There are different platforms. Windows is a desktop platform, so there's going to be differences from that, and things like that. So we are participating in that. So like the community understands that, I believe. So it's more of a you can do that, as well as if you're doing cross-platform, you get some of the cross-platform abstractions as well.
Well, of course, as well, we know from the Mac world, Apple's world, that they're trying to extend their mobile applications so they run in the desktop environments and so on and so forth. So I think, in fact, I just saw WWDC, they announced they're going to have an iOS for iPad exclusively to support the broader landscape sort of UI formats and so on and so forth. So to a certain extent, I can see all of this coming back full circle, and the work that you guys are doing in terms of taking that into more of a desktop style landscape, richer interface, actually paying dividends for the whole community in the longer term on the other platforms.
Yeah, to that point. So some of the stuff, Windows, as part of the Windows native platform, we have a lot of subject matter expertise in terms of like, what should things, how should things work for keyboard? How should things work with like better accessibility? How should things work with for pen and gamepad? Because we also support Xbox, things like that. There's a lot of subject matter expertise we bring, and we are working. So we have kind of come to a kind of a working model with Facebook and the extended React Native community that we will be actually pushing API updates that support some of these scenarios that we need for Windows, but we don't want to do it just for Windows. We want to do it for React Native so that people can actually take advantage. Like it doesn't, like if you can probably attach a Bluetooth keyboard to your iPad, and you would want some of the keyboard experiences to work well. So some of the stuff that we are kind of working on right now is to improve the overall story and kind of push, bring it back to the community, give back, and kind of grow that entire ecosystem. So
that's the exciting thing about the new Microsoft, isn't it? It's no longer just focused on protecting a small ecosystem that is sort of Windows exclusive. It's now a much better citizen with the rest of the world. It's awesome.
Exactly. I mean, we really all we care about is developer productivity and experience, like and we don't want to kind of reset anything. We don't want to take over anything. It's just we are participating in it. We are trying to be good citizens in it.
Awesome.
It's a big effort. Give us at least an idea around timeline.
Okay, so so the React Native, the C# version, the current version is already kind of out there, and people can start working on it, can start using it. There's tons of apps already in the store. Like our Windows store today has around like 175 apps or more than that use the React Native for Windows C# version right now.
Cool.
There's a lot of, so you can actually start using it today. The C++ version, we are it's all out there on GitHub. If you go to aka.ms React Native Windows, that will take you to our GitHub repo, and you can see all the milestones and roadmaps kind of published there, and we can show you some of that. But the overall high idea is that end of June, we are targeting some very high value key initial experiences. And once that's done for C++, we are hoping that by the end of the year, we will get to a solid minimum viable product, at which time the VNext version will replace the C# version as the mainline. So that's what we're targeting. But
that's awesome.
Nice.
But it's all like, like we are publishing every day. So every time a new feature is checked in, it's publishing a new feed to NPM. So it's all live, current. You can,
Okay, so somebody doesn't have to compile it themselves. You're already producing a package in the NPM, so people can just pull it down. That's awesome.
As long as you are just, if you're installing NPM with the latest version, you're getting the latest. There's no holding back of any features.
That's cool.
So as and when we are developing stuff, it's there. It's coming out.
It's yet another type of developer that we fully embrace. And then so they're just around the edges. We want to make sure everybody realizes that Windows is I don't know, what do we want to say? It's the welcoming environment. It's the friendly spot. It's where it's home for every developer. Isn't that what we said?
Yes. I believe there was a T-shirt on that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's home for every developer. So if you're a React developer today and you're watching the show, you can go to aka.ms, React Native Windows.
Yes.
And you can start investigating it right now.
Yep.
And you can start using it right now if you want to use the C# version of it that's implemented today.
And you can contribute to it. We have guidelines. You can file issues against us, and we are working on it. So and you can help make it better for us.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Do you just need coding help, or do you also want people to help out with documentation, those sorts of things?
Yeah, I mean, we'll probably need more help around documentation once we are somewhat into the, development phase. But yeah, our own PM team is going to start stepping up some of those investments around like samples and documentation in maybe a month or two. But yeah, we will start needing some of that too.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
Because you can always use extra free resources.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, and the kicker here is we are really participating in an already mature ecosystem. So a lot of documentation that's already out there for React Native is just going to work. It's just we're adding support for Windows. So
what's been your experience for existing developers who see what you're doing? Are they welcoming or reluctant, or what's been your experience so far?
I think I think developers are smart. They are self-selecting. .NET developers who are core .NET and C# and XAML, they don't care much about this, and I think that's fair. This is more of a we are making some investments for React developers and web developers to start using the Windows native platform and target that. And those developers are approaching it from that way. People who are already in React Native and React and web have seen this announcements and, are engaging. The stuff that we see on the repo and the engagement is all from that community. So that's pretty awesome. We like that it's all self-selecting and it's working out well.
That's good. That way you don't get the issue raised by the guy, why not UWP in C#?
Yeah, it's already there. We're not saying that it's not there. It's just one more thing. It's just an extra tool in a toolbox for people who care about it. That's pretty much it.
That's exactly right. Another reason to embrace Windows.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to make sure gets out there?
I think that's pretty much it. We are still in the early stages, but hopefully by the end of the year we will be at a pretty mature point that we can actually engage more actively and have a little more of a conversation on how would you like us to improve the platform, improve it more, and what kind of tools can we bring in and stuff like that. One other thing that I wanted to kind of talk about was so there are a lot of App Center services that are provided by Azure, and like the Visual Studio App Center modules that we have. One of which is called CodePush. And CodePush is a good service that's been out there. It already supported the C# version, and we are working with them to support the C++ version now. And that actually is a great service to do service-delivered experiences using React Native for your store apps. So if you are, building React Native apps, and for example, you have a quick hotfix that you need to make, or you want to switch, like a quick icon needs to be changed for your app, or whatever, UI updates and things like that. You can use CodePush to push updates to your app into the end user's machine without having to wait for the end user to update their apps and stuff like that. So it's a good service for that. And all of these ecosystem of services and tools and offerings, we are trying to make sure that it works against React Native for Windows.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
And CodePush also handles the incremental updates as well, so you don't have to think so hard about it.
Yes.
A little bit like Click Once.
A little bit like the Windows Store.
Yeah.
That's like exactly right. Well, thank you for coming and talk to us about this. I know there are a lot of developers out there who, one, maybe they've inherited an application and the decision has already been made, or they are already experts at this and this is just where they naturally gravitate because this is where they've directed their career. And now we've given them yet another good option. That doesn't just say, hey, you can also include Windows, but it also can say, hey, we're including Windows in a way that is serious, right? And it's something
part of the community, not aside from the community.
That's right. And we're not saying if you want Windows, then come do it our way. We'll meet you where you are. There are just a lot of developers like that.
Yeah.
Yep, yeah. That's exactly what it is.
Thanks very much, Harini.
Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, you got it.